Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Jeff Spikers, and this is EMG Student Television. On this episode of EMG TV, Ask the Expert, featuring our in-house teaching expert, Mr. Shaun Wilcox. On this segment of Ask the Expert, we will be answering your questions about our featured topic, Content and Language Integrated Learning. EMG TV canvassed students in the EMG Teacher Training Program and asked them to present their questions about CLIL. We have reviewed the questions from the students and chosen 20 questions for our expert to answer. So let's roll those questions and see what our expert's responses are.
Do students confuse the content knowledge if international and Vietnamese curriculum are carried out at the same time?
Hello Rosie, thank you for your question. I don't think that the studying the same content in the Vietnamese curriculum and the integrated program with the English language elements side would cause the students to become confused. I think if anything it can reinforce the knowledge, whether they study it at the same time concurrently or whether they study the same subject at different times in the year. I think it's more likely to reinforce knowledge that they've learned if they're studying it in both languages. And additionally, they could also benefit from two different approaches to teaching the content as well. So I think it's actually a good thing if they study the same subject in both languages.
I'm Cindy from K11, and can you answer these questions? How can we assess contents and language of the students? And can you tell me more details about the assessment grids?
Hello Cindy, thanks for your question as well. I think that you can assess the students' content and knowledge constantly throughout every lesson. Assessment doesn't necessarily need to be formal in the form of an exam. Of course, exams do tell you how well the students have obtained some knowledge, and they can also test their thinking skills and let you know maybe what areas students need some extra help on. But there are many other ways of assessment, literally such as just listening to the students' conversations as you walk around the class, giving them group work and projects to do which allow them time to actually really focus on the work and to process the information. Some students will do very well in an exam, but with coursework they don't do so well, and vice versa. So you really need to assess in lots of different ways. Another point that I think is also important is that before you start teaching any subject, especially in CLIL, you should always try and assess the students' existing knowledge and try and access that. One example I can think of is if we're teaching the human organs, for example, often the students know where lots of the organs are and what lots of the organs do, but they can't necessarily explain that in the second language. So at the start of the lesson, we could just give them a blank piece of paper with the outline of the human body on, and ask them to draw all the organs that they know, and perhaps write the name of them in English. This way, before you start teaching, you'll be able to know what the students actually already know in their own language, and that gives you a great starting point for the lesson.
Community online is a good way to help the students improve their teaching skills.
Yes, of course, using the English CLIL community online is a very good way to find out information and make yourself become a better teacher. With anything you find online though, do look at it, and you have to ask yourself if it will work in your classroom, because you have different situations in different countries, and also lots of people that post things online aren't always necessarily the most intelligent people, and they're not worth listening to sometimes. So you really have to look at what's been put online and decide if it works for you and if you think it actually really is a good idea. Another way you can get lots of support is just from speaking to your peers and exchanging ideas and having conversations with them. And also, of course, your teachers in the integrated program can be a great help with that.
Today I have two questions for you. The first, is CLIL suitable for Vietnamese class with our students, and how can we this in this case? And the second question, will subject teacher and language teacher cooperate in CLIL teaching in Vietnam in the future?
Yes, I think CLIL is suitable for students of any age, from young learners all the way up to adults. It's just a case of adjusting the activities, just the same you would with any other lesson, really. With respect to CLIL teachers and Vietnamese teachers cooperating going forward, future in Vietnam, it's certainly something that we would like to see happen in the future.
Mr. Shaun and Ivy from K11. I would like to ask you one question. What facilities do CLIL classrooms need to work effectively? Thank you.
Hello, Ivy. In terms of the facilities that a CLIL classroom needs, I would say the number one thing that a CLIL classroom needs is a capable teacher who's competent in the second language. The CLIL is taught all over the world in lots of different classrooms. Of course, having the best technology available to you opens up the possibilities of different things you can do, but if the teacher is flexible and imaginative and open-minded in their approach as to how do they deliver their lessons, it can really be done in any situation.
Hello, Mr. Shaun. I have the questions for you. How can the content teacher and the language teacher cooperate?
Hello, Maria. Yes, I think the classroom teacher or the CLIL teacher do definitely need to cooperate effectively. They need to work closely together and understand each other's learning objectives and make sure that the learning objectives of one teacher is reinforced in the other class. The most effective thing you can really do is form a really good relationship with the classroom teacher and the CLIL teacher and make sure you're talking to each other all the time.
Mr. Shaun, I have a question. How many CLIL teachers are needed to be trained in Vietnam?
Thanks for your question, Scarlett. It's a little bit difficult to answer, but I would say as many CLIL teachers as possible would be great in Vietnam, because the world is becoming a lot more globalized. So even if the students know a subject or a content very well in Vietnamese, it's quite likely going forward that when they're older, they're going to have to use this content knowledge in English. So I would say as many as possible in order for Vietnam to succeed in a globalized world.
Mr. Shaun, I'm Julie Baby from K11. Today I have a question for you. Training a language teacher into a CLIL teacher is more effective than training a subject teacher, isn't it?
Hello, Julie Baby. Generally speaking, the language teacher is likely to have a better command of English, so they would need to learn the new content knowledge. Whereas a content teacher, of course, they have knowledge of the content, but if their English is zero, it's going to take them a lot more work to bring their English level up to the level required in a CLIL classroom. I will say, however, though, that lots of people and more people can speak English these days, so really the most important thing for a CLIL teacher is the attitude of the teacher and their approach to delivering CLIL lessons.
Mr. Shaun, this is Casey from K11. I have a question for you. Do Vietnamese teacher teach some periods and foreign teacher teach some periods in the CLIL class? And do Vietnamese teacher can use a little bit Vietnamese in CLIL class or not?
Hello, Katie. Well, CLIL is implemented around the world in lots of different ways. So at some schools, all of the lessons are CLIL-based lessons. At other schools, they have their regular lessons and they have additional CLIL lessons on top. So that it really can be done in any way. It's not necessarily one way or the other. In terms of using Vietnamese in the class for a CLIL teacher or the first language, that is okay as long as it's to support the main learning objectives. You shouldn't be given direct translations that students don't necessarily know the meaning of and they're just remembering them. So it's okay as support, but only to support the learning objective, and it should be kept to a minimum if possible.
Hello,
Mr. Shaun, here my questions. Does the CLIL Math and Science run alongside the Vietnamese Math and Science program? If yes, how do we solve the alignment conflicts?
If the maths and science in a CLIL lesson run alongside the maths and science in the Vietnamese curriculum, I don't necessarily see alignment conflicts. I see opportunities to reinforce the learning in both the two lessons. The only real exception to this are very minor things, such as using a decimal point instead of a comma. There's a few differences between the way we express things in maths, but usually by the time we reach these points in the curriculum, the students are old enough to understand and to make the difference, to see the difference between the two and just remember them. And even if they're studying the same subjects at different times in the curriculum, I think this is a good thing because it acts as a review and it accesses the knowledge again. So if they study fractions in Vietnamese and then they study it again a few weeks later in the CLIL classroom, it's just going to help them remember the fractions that they learned earlier on in the Vietnamese class. It won't necessarily cause a conflict.
Hello, Mr. Shaun. Would you please give me the answer to this question? Do we have any books about resources and material? If yes, what are they? How can we access them?
There are plenty of resources online to support CLIL teachers. You won't necessarily be using these resources directly because you'll need to look at them and adjust them to your students. Also, working with your peers who are doing the same thing is a great way to get resources and add them to your resource bank. At the start, if you're teaching the CLIL method, there is a lot of work involved in creating the resources that are specific to the language needs of your students. But once you have these resources, you can use them again and again and you can improve on them.
If the student parents, they want the student to have a certificate like in general English, like starters, do they need to attend another English course, or the English in the CLIL program is enough for them to take the general English certificate?
That's a good question, May. The vocabulary for the general English exams is often quite specific, so some separate lessons outside of the CLIL lessons would probably need to be spent teaching this specific vocabulary, especially in the younger years. But in terms of as we go up the years, we still need to teach some time for the general English to learn the specific vocabulary and sentence structures that's dictated by the curriculum of the general English. But usually by studying the CLIL program, the students will already have an excellent command of English, so learning this additional vocab and additional sentence structures shouldn't be too challenging from the students because they're already working at a much higher level than general English exams require.
My question is that, can you tell me how can we interact with children's parents effectively?
In terms of interacting with parents about CLIL, of course, communication with the parents is very, very important. You could send letters home to them, there could be a website, it may not always be feasible in your situation. Another great way to do it is just to show the parents the work the students have done. Perhaps have a display in the classroom or somewhere that the parents will see the really, really great work that you're doing with the students when they come to pick their children up from school, or perhaps the students can take things home that they've made in the classroom and show their parents. Hopefully this will bring the parents on board with the idea of CLIL and see really how beneficial it is.
Can you share some difficulties that you had
Certainly. Well, when you first start teaching CLIL and using the methodologies involved in it, it is challenging and it does take some time to get your head around the structure and how to do it in a really effective way. In particular, if you want me to be specific, one problem I found is with some science textbooks. Most of them are written specifically for first language learners. So sometimes it's difficult to use those textbooks to convey the concepts that you want to for the students. So as well as actually showing the students the concepts and ideas in real life, when it comes to using the textbook, you really need to scaffold the lessons and structure it in a way to help them understand the textbook.
Who will support us materials when we are CLIL teachers?
Being a CLIL teacher really is about using ideas that maybe you have seen online, or thinking up of your own ideas and creating your own materials, because CLIL is implemented in lots of different countries and people speak in different languages. So different language learners definitely have difficulty with different aspects of the English language. So when you make your materials, you really need to tailor them to the needs of the students from your country.
We are learning CLIL, so we really want to know how do we become an expert like you.
Hello Navi, thank you for calling me an expert and holding me in such high esteem, but I think that in terms of developing your knowledge of CLIL, listen to your teachers, number one. Number two, research things online and think about them and think about how you can apply them. And probably the most important one is implement these in your classroom, reflect on your lesson and see how well it went and see what you should change next time. So as you probably know, being a teacher, the more experience you have, the better you get, and you always feel you can improve more and more by experience. So just implement the lessons, read the theory, keep going, and most importantly, reflect and think how you can improve.
Do the content and language play equal roles in learning process?
Hello Rachel, yes, I do think they play equal roles, and they really do complement each other. The language reinforces the content and the content reinforces the language. What you're really doing with CLIL is that you're providing a real life scenario in which they can use the new language that you taught them, and they can immediately apply it to an idea, and they can immediately apply it to thinking skills. This is a little bit different to a classic ESL class where they're just learning words and sentence structures and language, and it's more for rehearsal in the real world. When you're using CLIL, they're immediately applying and activating and using the language that you just taught them. So they definitely play an equal role. They're both equally important and they both reinforce each other.
I have a question for you. What is the balance of teaching focus between learning language and content?
Hello Rosie, I'll just refer to my last answer that they are both equally important and deserve the same amount of time. And the balance between the content and the actual language element, again, it would depend on your class and the existing knowledge of your class. Some of them might already know lots of the English words, but have difficulty understanding some of the ideas behind the concepts and how to apply them. Equally, they might perfectly well understand the concept in science or maths, but not have the English ability to express that. So it's about accessing the knowledge of your students, seeing where they're at, and seeing which one they need most help with. And this could vary for lots of different subjects that you do. So just make sure you access the knowledge at first, and then you can decide where to address the imbalance.
Hi, Mr. Shaun, I have a question. Please help me. Are there other ways to train teachers in Vietnam apart from CLIL?
There are many different teaching methodologies, and there are many different ways to train teachers. So CLIL isn't the only way. But one thing to remember is that CLIL it's really an umbrella term, and within CLIL there are many, many different ideas and different teaching methodologies under this umbrella.
Hi, Teacher Shaun. My question is, how can we make our head teacher at school to understand about CLIL and he or she can support us to apply it at school?
It really depends on your head teacher, because some head teachers are very open to new ideas and they'll be very keen for you to implement CLIL and try it a lot in your classroom. Other head teachers who perhaps aren't quite so open to new ideas, I would say show them the results. Implement CLIL in the classroom. Show them how you do it. Show them the great work the students do. Show them the progress they make. And show them the positive feedback you get from other stakeholders. then they might be more open to listening to you about it.
And there you have it. Some very interesting questions with some great answers and advice from our in-house expert, Mr. Shaun Wilcox. We hope you have enjoyed today's episode and that you tune in again for our next episode coming soon. Until then, I'm your host, Jeff Spikers, thanking you for joining us here on Emg TV. Bye for now.